Jeffrey Sachs of Columbia University, one of our regular superstars, joins us today from Dubai. I won't even ask you what time it is there. It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon here on the East Coast of the United States. But Professor Sachs, it's always a pleasure, my dear friend. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be with you.
The last time you and I spoke, we were observing that the war in Ukraine is effectively lost, and there was sort of some sub rosa acknowledgement of that by elites in D.C. and Washington. I don't know if they acknowledge it publicly yet, but since then, the President of the United States has made a formal demand of the Congress for $68 billion in additional aid to Ukraine, and the Republicans have held it up for a variety of political reasons. Isn't the war in Ukraine over? And what would we gain by sending $68 billion now?
Well, another $68 billion means more slaughter of the Ukrainians. They're dying in mass numbers. Typically, it seems around 1,000 a day or so. The Russian air superiority, drone superiority, artillery superiority means that Ukraine is in desperate shape. People are being rounded up off the streets, a few days of so-called training, and then off to front lines with mass deaths. So there is no sense in more armaments right now that mean more deaths. Tens and tens of thousands of Ukrainians have died in recent weeks. It's an utter tragedy. And the one thing that Biden is incapable of doing, and he may literally be incapable of it, is negotiating with Putin. He just doesn't negotiate. He doesn't discuss. He doesn't get at any of the real issues that started this war and that have had the war continue. The United States blocked every off-ramp that was possible, because this has been a war to a very great extent about Biden's relentless insistence that NATO will enlarge to Ukraine. And every time that Ukraine has said we can be neutral, the United States has rejected that, thrown the Ukrainians back to die on the front lines, and then just more of this. Basically, because as is typical in U.S. failed wars and goes back to Vietnam, you just keep the fighting going no matter how many deaths, how much disaster, until after the next election. That's what Biden's trying to do. But, you know, the next election's a long way off, and that's a lot of people that will be dead uselessly, tragically, if this continues. So I applaud the Republicans for saying no, this makes no sense. I know part of the response in Congress was, we don't understand what this is for. Part of it was to tie it to border issues. But the bottom line was that they blocked this, and that's the right thing to do. But what Biden needs to do and has refused to do is actually engage in some negotiations with the Russians. And he has not done that for a single day since this special military operation started on February 24th, 2022. And before that, when President Putin put a security agreement draft on the table on December 15th, 2021, Biden said, we don't discuss it. So this is a president that has failed miserably in his role of negotiations. He misses the most basic line, that one of the first lines President John F. Kennedy told us in his inaugural address on January 20th, 1961, let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate. And President Biden is so afraid of negotiating that he has just told the Ukrainians, just go into battle, and it's hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians dead and hundreds of thousands wounded. The country is being destroyed, and all Biden can do is come up with this story that there's no alternative because otherwise we'll be fighting the Russians. The man is absolutely out of reality. I'm sorry to say it.
You may be onto something, Professor Sachs, with his fixation on Putin and unwillingness to speak to him. I don't know if you've seen this clip. It was just yesterday. It purports to be spontaneous. I don't know if he can talk for 2 minutes spontaneously or if there was one of those giant teleprompters behind the television camera. But here he is yesterday speaking to a television camera somewhere in the White House. To me, the most terrifying aspect of this speech is about 3/4 of the way through, where he basically says, if you don't give me the money I want, and if we don't help the Ukrainians out, you're going to see American soldiers fighting Russian soldiers in Europe. I want your thoughts on this.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to speak to you today about an urgent responsibility the Congress has to uphold the national security needs of the United States and, quite frankly, of our partners as well. This cannot wait. Congress needs to pass supplemental funding for Ukraine before they break for the holiday resources. As simple as that. Frankly, I think it's stunning that we've gotten to this point in the first place. While Republicans in Congress are willing to give Putin the greatest gift he could hope for and abandon our global leadership, not just in Ukraine, but beyond that. If Putin takes Ukraine, he won't stop there. It's important to see the long run here. He's going to keep going. He's made that pretty clear. If Putin attacks a NATO ally, then we'll have something that we don't seek and that we don't have today. American troops fighting Russian troops. American troops fighting Russian troops if he moves into other parts of NATO. Extreme Republicans are playing chicken with our national security, holding Ukraine's funding hostage to their extreme partisan border policies. And now they're willing to literally kneecap Ukraine on the battlefield and damage our national security in the process. Look, I know we have our divisions at home. Let's get past them. This is critical. Petty, partisan, angry politics can't get in the way of our responsibility as a leading nation in the world. We can't let Putin win. Say it again, we can't let Putin win. It's in our overwhelming national interest and international interest of all our friends.
Channeling his inner LBJ on Vietnam. I think you're right, Jeff. I think he is out of touch with reality, but please, your comments on a president of the United States suggesting if I don't get the vote I want, you're going to see American troops fighting Russian troops.
I think it's the kind of ridiculous scare tactics that go back for decades. They come up with anything to keep wars going. The domino theory, which is basically this: if we don't waste another $61 billion and tens of thousands of more Ukrainian deaths, the next thing is we're going to be fighting here, then here and here. This is exactly what they said about Vietnam, that all Southeast Asia, the whole world will fall to communist domination and so forth. This is typical. And Biden has been at this a long time. He knows that, I don't know if he knows now, he's a really old man, but he should remember the truth of all of this. Russia wasn't demanding any territory. Russia was demanding Ukrainian neutrality. That's all. Don't push NATO here. And then Biden was part of a covert regime change operation in February 2014 that overthrew a Ukrainian government that was pursuing the policy of neutrality. That's the truth. Victoria Nuland, his undersecretary of state, was caught online saying who was going to be the next prime minister after Yanukovych was overthrown. Then came the Minsk agreements. We've talked about this. The Minsk agreements were an agreement between Ukraine and separatist regions that said Ukraine would enable autonomy for the ethnic Russian regions. And then the United States said, blow it off, doesn't matter. Even though the UN Security Council backed the agreement, Russia said, aren't you going to enforce what you have signed and you're supposed to guarantee? No. Then in 2021, Putin said, stop NATO enlargement, stop the threats to come to our border. And I know because I called the White House at the end of 2021 saying, avoid this war. Stop. What President Putin's asking for is actually sensible for us. But no, Biden would not even talk about it with Putin. And then in March and April 2022, Zelensky said, okay, we can have neutrality. And they came just to an agreement until the United States marched in and said, don't sign that. We do not accept you, Ukraine, accepting neutrality. And Biden has put in more than $100 billion. It's not as if we've been sitting there doing nothing. We have armed them. We have given them budget support. This is just a disastrously failed effort, and he won't tell the truth, as usual. Just keep it going and then raise the stakes. This is Biden's folly, and it's got to stop.
What do you think motivates them? Do they want to enrich? Is it something as base as enrichment of the military-industrial complex? I mean, he must know that the war is unpopular. Isn't a single American soldier going to wish to go over there to die for Ukraine? Politicians usually are motivated by getting reelected. This doesn't even advance that ball.
These are coalitions of forces. So definitely the straightforward make money for the big five in the military-industrial complex, Northrop Grumman and Boeing and Lockheed and General Dynamics. Yeah, that's part of it, actually. And you can even watch the congressmen. I know some of them. Oh, they just want to sell armaments. And even Biden tried the absolutely unacceptable ploy of showing, you've got to vote for this $61 billion. Look at the jobs in your district, as if the best thing we can do is make armaments and send Ukrainian kids to die. That's and they were showing them, they were saying, yeah, absolutely, this is good for your district. This is good for jobs in your district. So that's part of it. Part of it is the neocon fantasy of the unipolar world that we can do anything, go anywhere. And NATO expansion was the emblem of that. And that's Victoria Nuland. That's Jake Sullivan. That's Blinken. That's Biden. They've been at this since they were a team in the Obama administration. This goes back a long way, and it has failed. They played a bad hand miserably, and they kept raising the stakes with a terrible hand. I don't even know if they have a pair of twos in their hand, but they kept raising the stakes. Putin kept calling, and they kept raising the stakes. And here he's trying this mad effort at the end when everyone can see who's following this day to day. This is a disaster. It's time for negotiations. It's actually time to say, you stop and we stop. And we got to figure out how to make peace come again. And Biden won't even try. Maybe he's just too old.
Switching gears, Professor Sachs, to the other hot spot. Since we spoke last, the truce has ended. The IDF has resumed its efforts at ethnic cleansing in Gaza. Where is the outrage that you and I remember from the Vietnam years among American academics and intellectuals? You work on the Columbia University campus when you're not traveling the world. Where is the outrage amongst academics about this slaughter?
Well, first of all, there's such a strong attempt to strong arm everybody. Don't say a word about the 17,000 Palestinians that have died. Don't say a word about the million that have been displaced. Don't say a word about the hundreds of thousands of homes that apparently have been destroyed in the bombing. If you say a word, you're anti-Israel, you're anti-Semitic. This is the latest attempt to silence anybody that opposes U.S. policy.
From
US
whom is
poli-
this? From whom, excuse me, Professor, from whom is this don't say a word command coming? Is it just a social pressure? Is it the administration of great universities?
Well, look, I'm away, but I saw in the press, I read today how the university presidents were grilled by Congress. There's a lot of posturing. This is American politicians have long believed that their ticket to success is to back Israel unconditionally. And what we're doing right now is more than backing Israel unconditionally. We are the suppliers of the bombs that are killing thousands, probably
Right.
by the end of this, tens of thousands of women and children, innocents in Gaza. And we actually have the president of Israel, Herzog, saying there are no innocent civilians in Gaza. I've never heard such vulgarity from a head of state, and one that we are giving bombs to carry out those crimes. So, yes, there's a lot of attempt by politicians, by any of Israel's backers who must be pretty desperate because the whole world sees massive war crimes right now. So they're trying to stop people from talking about this reality. The young people know it. The students on the campuses see what's happening. There's a huge generational divide that has opened up because young people are aghast at what Israel is doing. And older people expect young people to be in line and shut up. That's basically what they're told.
Is it the public policy? I'm using a typically American phrase here. Is it the public policy of the Netanyahu administration that Palestinian women and children are not civilians? That they somehow, by some absurd, bizarre rationalization, are combatants and therefore are fair game for the military to kill?
I think that there is plenty of evidence that the intent of the Israeli government is a mass ethnic cleansing. And many legal scholars say that this is tantamount to a genocide. In the Genocide Convention, one of the crucial points is intent. And boy, the ugly stream of rhetoric that has come out of the cabinet of Israel is absolutely shocking, that Gaza essentially will be unlivable afterwards, that there are no innocent civilians in Gaza. So legal specialists on genocidal intent are collecting these phrases, and the Israeli cabinet is not holding back, I would say, on providing evidence of this sort. So I think the intention was to cleanse Gaza. And the Egyptians said, no, not on our watch. You're not doing that. And the Israelis said, okay, we're going to bomb the north. People should flee for their lives to the south. We know that thousands and thousands could not flee and died under the rubble. Then they went to the south, and now they're bombing the south.
Right.
They're bombing the South. And now we have even stories in the New York Times, which is not exactly an anti-Israel newspaper, that the Israelis are telling the Gazans, go here, and then they're bombing the places that they've instructed the population to go to. And in our context in the United States, our politicians just want performative acts every day of support for Israel. That's all. They don't say a word about thousands and thousands and thousands of innocent people being killed by American bombs. But this is direct American complicity. It's legal complicity. It's moral complicity. It's a geopolitical disaster for the United States. I'm out around the world hearing the rest of the world's views, not the cocoon that the mainstream media or the US Congress has. There isn't anybody that I have come across in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, in the Middle East that has the slightest positive word to say about the United States. The US is just viewed as an accomplice to a massacre. And
here's you mentioned intent, which of course is key in any violation of international law. Though, as you know, international law is almost useless because it's not enforced. The United States vetoes very appropriate offerings in the Security Council. You know this better than anybody. However, here is Secretary Blinken. Poor guy. Looks like he hasn't slept in a week in this clip, attempting to address, and I think in a misleading way, Jeff, but I want your comments, the issue of the intent of the Israeli forces.
You've talked about what you made clear to Prime Minister Netanyahu and the War Cabinet, but what concrete and specific assurances have you gotten from them, if any? Based on what you heard from them today, are you confident Israel will follow the international laws of war in southern Gaza when it resumes its military operations? Thank you.
Thanks, Amara. So, as I said, we made clear the imperative that before any operations go forward in southern Gaza, that there be a clear plan in place that puts a premium on protecting civilians as well as sustaining and building on the humanitarian assistance that's getting into Gaza. And the Israeli government agreed with that approach. Israel understands the imperative of protecting civilians, the imperative of humanitarian assistance, and will continue to work to ensure that that carries forward in practice. And again, as I said to the Prime Minister, to the War Cabinet, intent is obviously where you start, and it's vitally important. And I'm very confident in the intent, but results, of course, are fundamentally what matters.
But Professor Sachs, I submit that that is grossly misleading. If Israel understands the imperative of protecting civilians, it's obviously not acting on that understanding. And
first of all,
our intent from what people do repeatedly.
But by the way, when it comes to Israel, they're saying it. So this is clearly Blinken repeating a line by lawyers in the State Department who are urging the Israelis, don't get so far out that you are going to be charged with massive war crimes and perhaps with genocide because your intent is plainly visible. So This is a complete dodge, but a dodge that comes from some lawyer telling Blinken, tell your Israeli friends. Now, here's the basic fact. It's not the U.S. warning anything. The U.S. is shipping the bombs that Israel is dropping on the buildings. That's all. This is American armaments, and it's not American armaments that were stockpiled years ago or weeks ago that just happened to be American in Israeli hands. We are shipping the bombs that Israel is dropping in real time. We are a party to the massacre. And that's Netanyahu says, what does he need from the United States? Munitions, munitions, munitions. And he's getting them in real time. So we're part of this. Blinken is not giving him advice. Blinken is giving him bombs. It's straightforward.
Right.
It's
right.
not complicated. And what's amazing for me, Judge, it's not so often you watch massacres in real time on television. We're watching an ethnic cleansing in real time using our weapons, our funding. We are an accomplice to a mass killing. That's it.
Yes. Nobody in the
And-
American
and-
government seems to understand that, and nobody's even articulating it, Jeff.
No, and what is not discussed at all, because basically they're all liars from morning till night. There are other ways to achieve security. The Arab world has said very clearly that it is interested in Israeli security in a political settlement. They've said that for years. They said that in an Arab Islamic conference just a couple of weeks ago, very clearly. There's a way out of this peacefully. The point, though, is, and it's a very obvious point, the Netanyahu gangsters, they don't want a political settlement. They want Israel in full control. Again, it's not a matter of inferring intent. This is exactly what Netanyahu says, that Israel will control Gaza. So they don't want a political settlement that would give them security. They are aiming at ethnic cleansing. It's an absolute war crime. It's repeated war crimes, but the United States is a party to it. We are every day supplying the bombs that are being used in this mass killing.
How do you see this ending, Professor Sachs?
I see it ending actually perhaps sooner than we think, when the whole world, except two countries, says it's got to stop. And the United States shakes a little bit because Biden's approval ratings are in free fall, absolute free fall. The Democratic Party is hemorrhaging support, and the support in his foreign policy has disappeared. So maybe someone still alive in the White House to real facts knows that this is a complete disaster from every point of view, but also the only one that they really care about, which is the political one. This is a complete disaster for the administration. This will absolutely drive the American population away from Biden. And so my view is that when essentially the whole world in the UN Security Council and UN General Assembly say it's got to stop, the United States is going to have to bend to the will of the entire world. And that may sound surprising, but I think it's actually going to happen, because this is devastating for American foreign policy, but it's also devastating for Biden's politics.
Do you think it's going to happen when other countries threaten military intervention, or sort of a diplomatic ostracizing of the U.S. and the Israeli governments?
I think mainly the latter, mainly showing that the world is aghast at these crimes. The United States is hemorrhaging any kind of support anywhere in the world. The costs to American foreign policy, to American diplomacy, to American legality are absolutely enormous. And I think this becomes more and more clear. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres invoked a very rare emergency clause in the UN Charter, Article 99, directing the UN Security Council to take up this issue with all urgency. This is very rarely done, but it is a measure of not only the grave crimes that Israel is committing, but a measure of the enormous stakes involved in a whole world that is witnessing slaughter. And so the Security Council will take this up this week. I am hoping that the Security Council not only will push for a ceasefire, and if the United States stands alone in a veto to stop the mass killing, it makes it even more extraordinarily clear the American complicity in this. But I am hoping that the UN Security Council will follow through on more than 5 decades of resolutions that say that the solution to this ongoing bloody crisis is a state of Palestine and a state of Israel living side by side. And for all those who say that's impossible, there's no one to talk to and so on, talk to Saudi Arabia, talk to Jordan, talk to Syria, talk to Egypt. They've just said a week ago, they say every day, yes, that is the solution. So we fake it by saying there's no one to talk to, keep the bombs going because there's no one to talk to, but there are plenty of people to talk to. There's a whole world that agrees with that. And if the United States would just get it into its head, whether it's in Ukraine or in Gaza, to have diplomacy rather than just a military approach, we'd actually find out we could get something done in this world.
Professor Jeffrey Sachs, at your passionate and articulate best, thank you very much. I know it's very late in the day where you are. Doesn't affect you. Thank you very much for your time and for your passion. We hope you can come back again next week when there'll be more horrible things to talk about.
Let's hope we have a glimmer of good news by then, but I'll be delighted as always to be with you next week.
Thank you, Professor Sachs.